Përshëndetje për gjithë, faleminderit që na jeni bashkuar në sesionin e radhës, përkatësisht në njërin nga sesionet kryesore të konferencës Diaspora Flet 2020, ku folës do të kemi zotrin Kingsley Aikins nga Networking Institute, të moderuar nga zotrin Martin Russell, po ashtu nga Irlanda të dytë, të cilët do të vinë të sjellin përvojën e tyre me angazhimin e diasporës irlandeze, por edhe përvojën dhe ekspertizën e tyre ndërkombëtare në angazhim në mbi 30 shtetet e ndryshme në çështje që lidhen me diasporën dhe filantropinë. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We are continuing with the next session or the keynote event where we have Kingsley Aikins and Martin Russell from the Networking Institute, who are going to share their experience with working with out of 30 diasporas in the world and their experience with Irish diaspora in the recent years in diaspora engagement and philanthropy. And we are pleased to have them here. So without losing more time, I'm giving the floor to Martin and Kingsley to continue their speech. And I would like to first thank them for joining us in this conference, and looking forward to have a fruitful discussion between them. Thank you. So Martin,
thanks,
the floor is yours.
Thank you, my friend. Kingsley, how are you?
Great to be here. Hey, you're with one of our favorite organizations and favorite countries, Germany, of Albania.
No, well said, you know, and you have a great line that you use when you talk about diaspora communities, and particularly the Irish community, Kingsley, when you say never give a Mick a mic. You know, I think they've given two mics today, so I think let's make a promise to cause as much trouble as we can in the next 20 minutes or 25 minutes. You know, and let's begin. And let's begin maybe with a little bit of a challenge as well. You know, you mentioned this is an organization that we're both very big fans of, you know, and see a lot of potential in. So as I was dialing in over the last couple of days, I saw something that was really interesting to me, and it was a donate button underneath the screen. So I want to set a bit of homework to the community and people listening, but I think we need to back up what we say as well. So let's set a challenge that every time we mention the word Ireland, we both donate $20 to that fund, and they can let us know at the end of the conversation how much we got them. Could be a costly afternoon, huh? So look, buddy, over the next kind of 20 minutes, what I'd love to do is just to give a donate button underneath the screen. So I want to set a bit of homework to the community and people listening, but I think we need to back up what we say. I think there was just a little bit of echoing, so we'll just pick up where we were, Kingsley. You know, over the next 20 minutes, what I'd love to do is just go on a little bit of a journey, you know, in a sense of diaspora engagement more broadly, and have just an open and honest discussion in a sense of, you know, where the sector has come from, its origins and its history, where you think it is now, and most importantly, probably for Garmin, where you think it's going to go in the future and where we can look at. So let's maybe begin with that question and discussion in a sense of, you know, the history and the origins of diaspora. Where has this all come from?
Well, listen, actually, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. We are all diaspora. Every one of us, we're all originally descended from Africa. And it's important that we kind of remember that. But actually, the word diaspora is two Greek words, dia meaning over and spiro meaning scattering, and was first used with reference to the exile of the Jews from Babylon in the 5th century BC, and has always been associated with the Jews and with Israel. But actually, over particularly the last sort of 20 years, it's gone mainstream. So what was once a kind of a niche interest is now a mainstream interest. Over 100 countries, regions, and cities are now putting in place or have in place strategies to connect with their diaspora. And as you know, you and I, Martin, we take quite a broad definition of diaspora, because actually countries and cities have diasporas, universities have diasporas, they call it alumni, sports teams have diasporas, and you're a Spurs supporter, and there's Spurs supporters all around the world. I'm an Irish rugby supporter. They're going to play England in an hour. There's support all around the world. So really, diasporas are networks of people with an interest of the country of origin, ancestry, or affinity. So that's where I come from.
You know, first of all, hopefully we have a successful afternoon in the rugby field. You know, I think Spurs are playing after that, so it could be an emotional afternoon for the both of us. So look, we often talk quite a bit, Kingsley, about, you know, maybe some of the more complex or maybe sensitive issues around diaspora. And I suppose the word that comes out to just before diaspora and a lot of people's understanding of the topic or kind of how they like to conceive the topic is that word migration. You know, and you've been quite astute, I think, and quite creative in seeing some of the distinctions between migration and diaspora, because obviously migration is a very sensitive word at the moment, both in terms of political confidence and public confidence. So I'd love to get your impression on, you know, what are those distinctions, because I think they're critically important in understanding the power that diaspora can have for that debate on migration.
You're right, Martin. Whether we like it or not, probably one of the most toxic words in the English language is the word migration and migrants. It conjures up images. It's a very emotionally charged term. It imagines things like jungles in Calais, caravans of people moving up through the Middle East. Tragically, pictures of you think of the young little Alan Kurdi, the young Syrian boy lying on a beach in the Mediterranean, and his mother and his brother both have drowned. Very emotional, very toxic, very negative images, a lot. But actually, diaspora, which is caused by migration, of course, is got a much more kind of positive kind of view. Migration is about people dispersing around the world. Diaspora is about people connecting back. It's kind of like a convergent force. And I think it was interesting, just a few years ago, The Economist had a front page of their photograph of the magazine, and they talked about the magic of diasporas. And the article was entitled, How Migrant Business Networks Are Changing the World. It was written by Robert Guest, the business editor of The Economist. And he talked about networks of kith and kinship, is what he talked about. He talked about the power of trust. And just recently, in the last certainly within the last year, he wrote another cover article item for The Economist called The Magic of Migration. So it's very interesting that, you know, the full journey that The Economist have gone. So I think that they're both very, very powerful metaphors for the potential. And I think that word diaspora can do a great deal to actually improve, if you like, the image and the brand image of the word migration. And of course, when you look at migrants, we're looking now at a potential vaccine for COVID coming out of Germany, but it's 2 people from Turkey originally. And we all know just the power and the influence and what migrants have done around the world to drive all sorts of economies. So big issue, important debate.
No, I think you're spot on, and just to echo to that, and this is $20 I don't mind spending. I think we're seeing hopefully another greening of the White House as well. So another diaspora story to add to that. Yeah. You know, let's address the elephant in the room, Kingsley. And you know, people, I think you mentioned the vaccine and that big C word, if you will, in terms of COVID and the pandemic. You know, we've had a lot of debate and discussion ourselves internally and with the wider diaspora community over the last 6 months to 8 months on, you know, why it's more important now than ever. And I'd love to maybe just get you to unpack that a little bit for the audience, just so you get a sense of, you know, do you see that rise of prominence in diaspora engagement as being accelerated by the pandemic, or do you see this as something that's been coming anyway? You've mentioned, you know, for example, the rise of ministries and governments that have strategies or units and things like that. So I'd love to get a sense of where we are now in the midst of the pandemic, because for me, quite bluntly, I think diaspora has been one of the more positive stories and one of the more uplifting stories during this pandemic. So I'd love to get your sense of kind of where we are now and why it's more important than ever.
Right. So, you know why diasporas are important. Well, you know, there's a sheer numbers game here. If you think about it, in the year 1990, there was 150 million people living outside the country they were born in. That's now 280 million people. If it were a country, it'd be the 5th largest country in the world. And what's making all of this so possible now is technology and communications, which are changing everything. And so our connectivity, just like it is today, is instantaneous. And although COVID has left a dreadful, dreadful legacy around the world and continues to, it has forced us to be creative and innovative in the way we communicate. For example, today's event is one of very many. So now we are all very adept at using Zoom and Teams and all the technology. And although I certainly miss the connectivity and I miss being with people and I miss the serendipity and the random chance of meeting people, I think there are some interesting pluses for technology and for Zoom, which have come out of this COVID crisis. One is that we are not geographically restricted. We can connect with anybody, anywhere in the world, and we all are. And secondly, we don't have to get on a plane and fly over somewhere and spend time and energy and carbon footprint and grooming time and all these things. So that's a saving there, which is interesting. Also, everybody is available because nobody's going anywhere. I'm always getting people ringing me up saying, are you available next week? Of course I'm available. We're in lockdown. I'm not going anywhere. And what's more people, there are more people online today than ever before in history. So now we know where people are. And finally, there's one company called LinkedIn that have the information on 700 million people in the world. They have all their education, all their experience, what their jobs they've done, what they're interested in, where they went to school. So now you can find out about people, you know where they are, you know they're available very cheaply, virtually free, and I find free a very compelling price point. You can connect with these people and you're not geographically restricted. So that's all the pluses I think is very interesting. But I think the power of the importance of diaspora means that people can be here and there. You can live a hyphenated life. You can live in Southern California, but be very committed to Albania. You know, so in the old days, your geography dictated your identity. Where you lived meant who you were. But that's changed because of technology. Now we say geography is history. Now, in fact, and this is, I think, really interesting and very relevant to what Gurmin and everybody else is doing. It's more important what you do than where you are. That's a fascinating concept. You could be anywhere. You know, we have 10,000 people work for Google in Dublin, but many of them are living all around the world, but they're actually operating collectively through technology through Dublin. Mm-hmm. So that's fascinating. So finally, you know, or not finally, but another point is that what we call lost actors can now be national assets. They now can be part of who you are. And it's very interesting, particularly in another $20 for Ireland, the difference between the state and the nation. The state being lines on a map, you know, a bit of geography, very often very small piece of geography, but the nation being a global notion. That's really fascinating. Mm. And the thing is, diasporas, there's a whole subset of foreign direct investment, which we call diaspora direct investment. And diasporas are fascinating when it comes to investing back in their home country, because they've got some unique characteristics. They've got high motivation, despite the difficulties. Many other people would be put off, but actually, because of their diaspora connections and links and their ancestral affinities, they will push through those difficulties. Secondly, they've got knowledge of the country that they're living in, but they've also got knowledge of their home country. So they've got knowledge of two areas. People who are investing have financial resources, and we know that they've got networks in their own countries, networks of affluence and influence, we sometimes call that. They also have a strong sense of belonging. So now, for the first time ever, you know, brain drain can become brain gain and brain exchange. You don't have to return to be a big influence back in your country of origin, ancestry, or affinity. And there's this whole notion of nation branding, how your diaspora, and we might talk about this with, for example, with India and Ireland and other countries, how your diaspora can actually help impact on the brand that your nation has. So I think it's fascinating what's going on. We're now seeing what we call business rock stars out there, people who are leaders of corporates in countries like the United States, identifying back with their country of ancestry. I mean, Indra Nooyi, head of Pepsi, very involved with India. She's was head of the US-India Business Council. Mukhtar Kent, head of Coca-Cola, was head of the US-Turkey Business Council. You have Andrew Liveris, who just last week they raised nearly $2 million for Greece, and he's head of a big US company called Dow Chemicals. You know, the Indians are the most successful ethnic group in the United States. They have 2/3 of the Indians in the United States have degrees, which is 3 times more what the local population have. They're highly educated. So here you have a population of people from one of the poorest countries in the world, have the richest and most successful diaspora group in the most powerful country in the world. So I think it's extraordinary what's happening now with diasporas, and we're now bringing attention to this. And what you're doing here with Gurmin and Albania, I think is just absolutely, the timing is perfect. And, you know, nobody started a large organization, Martin, you know that. I mean, everything starts at zero and you grow. When I worked for the Ireland funds in the US, we started, in fact, it was quite a funny story. We had a big black tie fundraising dinner to start our diaspora organization in New York in the Waldorf Astoria. And the dinner was so dramatically unsuccessful the only reason we had a second dinner a year later was to pay for the first dinner, and that's $700 million ago. So I love this notion. Nobody started a large organization, and it was the son of a Syrian migrant, aged 21, started a company in his garage, and that company was called Apple, and that guy was called Steve Jobs. I think that says it all.
Well said, well said. And look, there's a couple of things I want to unpack, but I see the questions coming in. And just for the audience, please keep filling in your questions. And I think the question from Parry, this question hopefully will bridge into that in terms of successful initiatives or structures to look at. But just bring it back to what we've heard over the last couple of days at this very conference. And a couple of sessions have really stood out for me. And one message in particular, I think the session on cultural diplomacy was a pretty stunning session. And it came back to the sense of, how do we tell the story of Albania, and in many ways recapture that confidence within the community and build unity within the community. And I think that translated into a statement from Ambassador Kim as well, when she spoke on her session with colleagues from the ambassador in Kosovo, where she said it's about finding ways in which Albania and its diaspora can rediscover their power. And I think you made a very important distinction about how we do that in the sense of the difference between the nation and the state. I'd love to maybe just get one or two lines so we can clarify that for people, because I think that's at the essence of how we go about that issue of rediscovery. So I'd love maybe if you can give 1 to 2 lines on that before we go into those case studies and spend a few bucks on shamelessly promoting Ireland.
Yeah, so I'm obviously a huge fan of that notion of the nation is so much bigger than the state, and I mean I think that if you watch the policy that Ireland been implementing, we've just got a diaspora policy which was launched this week. But prior to that, the governmental policy was positioning Ireland as a small country at the center of the world. Now, I think diasporas are particularly relevant for smaller countries because right now in the world, smaller countries need their friends. You cannot rely on major powers, which are now actually sometimes trying to exit from multilateral organizations. They're building walls, not bridges. And so I think that small countries suddenly have discovered they have a terrific power in this network of diasporas. I mean, it's what we call soft power. It's we don't have any hard power in Ireland. We're not planning to invade anybody in the next short future. The last time we had a battle was in 1014 and we lost. So but yet, and here's the thing, we believe we have an empire, not built by military might or force of arms, but just by the fact that in our country, 10 million people have left here and went all over the world. And that old military kind of power, the veni vidi vici of an empire, I came, I saw, conquered, actually can be replaced by the soft power that diasporas represent. And soft power, as Joseph Nye of Harvard wrote in his book, that's the ability to get the outcomes that you want through attraction rather than coercion. And that's really, really interesting. And what you can do is you can take your soft power and it can be converted into hard impacts. And you and I were involved with Hillary Clinton when she launched the Global Diaspora Forum in Washington. And the Americans, and they didn't particularly like talking about soft power because it seemed a bit weak, but they talked about smart power. I think that's really interesting. So the philosophy, the approach, I like to take is this notion that countries, cities, regions have a thing called diaspora capital. And diaspora capital, we define as the overseas resources available to a country, city, region, organization, and is made up of 3 flows: flows of people, flows of knowledge, and flows of money. And what you got to do is put in place strategies, policies, programs, projects that actually convert that soft power into hard impacts.
So let's pick up on that, because I think it's a natural segue to the question from Parry about, can we discuss successful diaspora structures and strategies to have impact and to help the home country? So could you give us, I know you're a founding member of a certain group, so I'll let you lead in with that. But, could you share with us some examples? Look, they don't have to be just, we don't want to overkill in Ireland. I know we've worked globally, so anything that you see is particularly interesting. I think a hidden question in that is, what is the role of the diaspora and what is the role of government in that? And I think, to kind of bring it around so that we have time for Q&A, I'd love to get your lens on a sense of, we had a fascinating session last night on philanthropy as well, and the challenges around institutionalizing philanthropy for the Albanian diaspora. So successful strategies or models, and, that sense of, particularly with a philanthropic lens as well, how do we do that?
Well, just picking up quickly on the last point, because that was what I did. I worked for a diaspora philanthropy organization, raised 700 million, realized there was an incredible opportunity there, which had never been developed or exploited before. Now, that's only going to increase. It's going to increase for one particular reason, the intergenerational transfer of wealth. Now, particularly in these advanced countries like the UK, US, Australia, etc., is going to be absolutely enormous. The world is a very unequal place, as we know, and wealth has been accumulated now at the top end in huge, huge volume. So I think we're going to see some extraordinary philanthropic activities happening in the next while. We had somebody that we discovered in the United States who was of Irish ancestry. He wasn't born in Ireland. His name is Chuck Feeney, and he ended up giving $2 billion US dollars to universities and education in Ireland. And we would not be where we are today were it not for that one person. So sometimes I say, did you know you don't need thousands and thousands of people in your diaspora to impact on your country? You've got, 20 people can have a gigantic impact. But I think the prior question you were asking is, what are the factors for success, if you like, for diaspora engagement? And I think, countries and regions and cities have to make a decision, and they have to make a decision to invest in this area. And invest, I mean, you need resources, you need people, you need money. And the big question you threw out there was, what's the role of government? And the role of government, there's generally two different roles they can have. They can be a facilitator of diaspora engagement, or they can be an implementer of diaspora engagement. My experience looking at lots of countries is that a bit of both works quite well, but not all of one or all of the other. So you need to have lots of private organizations in the diaspora doing lots of great stuff. And it could be in sport, could be in culture, it could be in tourism, could be education, could be philanthropy, lots of areas. So you want a lot of stuff happening there. But you also need the imprimatur, you need the support of government. Governments have money, they have resources, they have locations all around the world. They've got influence, they've got good people, educated, smart people working for them. And so you need to take an all-of-government approach to diaspora engagement. This isn't just something that the Department of Foreign Affairs do, it's got to be everybody. You've got to listen to your diaspora. If there's one successful thing countries who do this well have followed, is they've listened intensely to their diaspora. Because many diaspora think all you want from us is money, and then you'll disappear. You've got to realize that your diaspora is not one homogenous group of people. There's no such thing as one single diaspora. There's literally hundreds of diasporas. And by the way, the diaspora may not be about your country, but it may be about a place within your country, which could be a city or a region. And so, you've got to realize that there's segments in that whole diaspora engagement. The fundamental question you've got to ask, and technology is now making this possible, but this is the big challenge for all countries about their diaspora. And the question is, who are they, where are they, and what are they doing? That's really important. And until technology has come along, it's always been quite hard to find that information. And very often, diaspora groups in the countries of destination can be quite competitive. And sometimes they don't have a very good relationship with the home country. Sometimes there's some tension. Sometimes there's resentment. Sometimes they blame the home country because of what's happened to them because they've had to leave. And sometimes there's a lack of trust in the institutions in the home country. Lots of challenges, but all doable.
No, fascinating stuff, and I think just to echo that, we have some great questions coming in. So let's address the questions, because I'd love to get to kind of close the session with two of us sticking our neck on the line, looking into the crystal ball and then seeing where all this is going, just to show that we probably will get it wrong. So I just want to get a sense of, just to quickly, maybe a quick fire, conscious of time as well, quick fire round of questions. Parry mentioned about identifying a successful model. I mean, from my end, I think the India story is fascinating. I think it's important as well to figure out what type of engagement you're talking about. If it's around brain gain, academic exchange, if it's philanthropic, and building it in a segmented approach. A question that I'd love to throw at you, Kingsley, maybe 2 to 3 to get quick fire responses. How do you see the role of Albanian women in the diaspora back home? And what role models should we follow to create an Albanian diaspora group, especially for women? So that's the first question. The second question is, could you list what are 3 key motives of diaspora experts to begin brain gain exchange in areas of civic participation and with the country of origin? And for now, and we'll hopefully get to more in a moment, is a point about that the Albanian diaspora is quite stronger maybe in Greece and Italy, but the level of maybe structured engagement is quite quite low. So what are the kind of the building blocks or the first steps to build that sense of community? So maybe those three questions.
First question about women. You know, look, I just think, you know, women and the next generation are going to drive this. Are going to drive this in the future. You just look at who's coming out of universities these days. Who's qualifying? More women than men in nearly all disciplines. You know, not all, but nearly all. So these women are going to be moving up into positions of affluence and influence within companies. And so I think they've been the hidden potential for diaspora. So I'd be hugely positive about that. Second question was about, Martin?
Just what are the key motivations of diaspora experts to give back through brain gain and brain exchange? You know, what do you see is what would be driving that in terms of expectations or motivations?
Yeah, look, I think the motivation is that, you know, I always think the only mistake a country or a region can make in this whole area is not to have a diaspora strategy. So the important thing is to plan and have a strategy, you know, to plan and execute. And that's one of the things that's often missing. So I think if these people can focus and come up with a plan and execute it, then you're way ahead. It tends to be very ad hoc, spontaneous, rather than a national plan. It has to be part of the national plan, engaging. And the last one was about structures in Greece and Italy, and
so the beginning process of how do you begin that process of strengthening those?
Well, I think you know, Martin, the Irish government have a budget to support diaspora organizations around the world, and part of that support is capacity building, is to make them better organizations. So a few years ago, they brought the leaders of all these organizations back to Ireland and did some training with them to build capacity within their organizations, to help them to be better at fundraising, to, you know, be better at governance, you know, to watch out for founder syndrome, people who start these organizations and then they never leave. So I think that, you know, it's really important that you have strong, well-run professional organizations in the diaspora. They need support and help and finance.
Perfect. Look, I'm conscious of time, so I'll wait till we get kicked off. But look, just to kind of wrap up my end, we have another couple of questions coming through. You know, what advice would you give to Kosovo and Albania after the knowledge you get now? You know, I'm not saying this because we're on the conference, you know, but Gurmin for me is probably one of the 3 top emerging diaspora organizations in the world, you know, and that's my opinion. Kingsley, you can speak for yourself. So I think the answer to this for Albania and Kosovo and the region is in that team. You know, I think one thing I would say is that the quiet champions of this type of work have always been nonprofits and NGOs. And it's important that we never take them for granted. And I think it's important that we support them and invest them so they can develop their own capacity. So hopefully that addresses that question. I think we've spoken a bit to the other question about younger generation and second and third generation. I think that comes back to your point about definition, Kingsley. Is that fair to say that we need to take a very inclusive definition and it's more about a sense of belonging? And bringing through, you know, because a lot of countries like to tie it to citizenship, for example. And for me, that can narrow the focus quite a bit, but feel free to disagree. And the final question I think we can get to is a sense of, you know, how do we develop e-government and a platform for engagement and doing this, I think, online as well. You have a great phrase, I think, that you talk about high tech and high touch. So it may kind of speak to that, but maybe if you want to say a few words on that.
Yeah, look, I think that it's all about building networks. I mean, that's the fact that you need to be. You got to build these networks, and you got to bear in mind mutual self-interest is quite important. You know, people join these networks because it's good for them. So what you want to do is go for the triple win: something that's good for Albania, something that's good for the host country where these people are living, and something that's good for the people themselves. And I've noticed when I worked for 20 odd years, getting people engaged with our organization through the portal, the doorway, of philanthropy, they got engaged with us, and then it opened up into lots of other areas. And as you know from our definition of Diaspora Capital, we have 30 different subsections, and it can be involved with sport, it can be involved with tourism, it can be involved with education, lots of different ways. I do think the next generation are critical. They may not have an awful lot of money and resources, but they're going to be around for a long time. I do think that we have to think carefully about people who emigrate. And they go to other countries and they bring up their families. These people are very committed. They speak the language, they keep their religion, but their children are more diluted. And so they need a different approach. The next generation often needs a different approach. So it's this sense of having a sense of belonging, sense of, you don't expect them to come back, but you do want them to be engaged back. And what you want them to do is to lead a hyphenated life. So to be American and Polish, Australian and Greek, whatever that is, you want them to have a foot in both camps.
Perfect. Look, I just want to close with the crystal ball. I think it speaks to a question from our mutual friend, Bahar. And he says, thinking 20 years into the future, what are 3 things we should focus on engaging our diasporas? I'll let you go first. I'll go second, and I'll take notes from you. And, just to close, I want to thank you for your time and your insights. And the final question for me beyond that is, do we win in the rugby today?
I don't think like we are. So I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried about that. I'm more worried about the rugby than I am about diaspora. Put it that way. I mean, I think the 3 things that have to happen. I think philanthropy is going to be a very interesting area. I think inward investment trade is going to be a very powerful. DDI, diaspora directed investment, as a subset of FDI, and I think culture is important. I remember an Irish consul general in New York saying, in New York, there's 2 really important streets for Ireland. There's Wall Street and there's Broadway. And I thought that was a very interesting reflection of how culture can be a really powerful driver. And how we work with people like U2 and bands like that. And then just all the great writers, etc.
No, look, I think you hit the nail on the head. From my end, Behar, I echo that on diaspora philanthropy. It's something from my own personal career that I'm looking at quite strongly. I think the role of culture, and I think, the advice I give anybody at the moment, coming back to that, we're not going anywhere, is to take a time and look out the window a bit and see what's happening in the world. I think when you look at the moves for social justice, for racial equality, for dilution of difference, the role of youth in that, the role of gender in that, the role of climate change in that, I think there's a diaspora element to all those angles. So I think that's where we need to be looking. So
Martin, can I just finish one last thing? We've got on our website lots of information, and if you connect with us on LinkedIn, we can give you lots of free information. So please, love to build our network with you folks.
Well, incredibly well said, Kingsley. Hopefully for the audience, we got to as many questions as we could. We close by just saying to Liram and the team, let us know what the bill is in terms of the donation. And we wish you the very best for the rest of the conference. And look, you always have 2 friends in Ireland that are happy to help at any stage. So thank you for giving us the platform. Liram, back to you.
You on there, Martin?
I can't hear.
Yeah.
Martin, and we look forward to collaborating with you in the future.
Bye.
Thanks, Martin. I'll talk to you after the match. Thanks for doing that.
No, I don't.